Good afternoon. Uh, what was I going to say?
The date?
The date?
This is July 26, 2019. A beautiful day here in North Towanda Township. I am going to tell you a few things that have happened to me or did not happen to me over my 85 years or 95 years. I have three categories of incidents. The first one is when I faced certain death. The second one is when there was possible death because of a dangerous situation. And then the third one is interesting incidents. So I'll start with certain death. And number one was when I was 8 years old, I came down with a bad ear infection. This was, of course, in 1932, and this was before the era of common usage of penicillin and other antibiotics. And my ear infection, of course, my parents had taken me to our local doctor, and but it kept getting worse. I ended up in the hospital in Sterling, Illinois, and what I remember about it is I was in bed. My parents were there in the room with me, and the doctor came in with some papers, and he was discussing the situation with my parents. Pardon me. And he was telling them that there was nothing more that they could do there at the hospital. And of course, if there had been antibiotics available, they probably could have taken care of it pronto. But he said, there's nothing more we can do, and he just keeps getting worse and worse. And so obviously, he expected me to die. Well, I did. I didn't die. And as soon as I was back in school, this was in the spring, and they even promoted me to fourth grade, even though I'd been out for several weeks. Okay, number two. This occurred in 1949. We were living in Monroe, and we decided to go out to go swimming in a well-known swimming hole in the Schrader Creek. This was a creek that comes down from Barkley Mountain, and there was one spot right near the road where it was deep and a good place to swim. I took my two oldest boys, Alan and Reg, and a helper we had in helping Mom. Her name was Hope. So the four of us went swimming. We could jump off, into the deep water and had a good time. And everything went well. But I later learned that some people were quite aware that this harbored rattlesnakes. We didn't see any rattlesnakes. We didn't hear any rattling. And so the Lord was taking care of us, I'm sure, to keep us from getting snake bite, which would no doubt have been fatal.
So that was 1959?
1949. We're still in Monroe.
No, because Alan wasn't even born in 1949. Must have been 59.
Yeah, must be. Sorry about that. Okay, that now the third one was in 1963. I had sold our Volkswagen Beetle in 1962 to a friend who needed a second car. And then I had bought another used car. It was a French-made Peugeot, which was a little bit bigger than the Volkswagen Beetle, and a little bit more powerful, but not a whole lot more powerful. And a church had voted to send somebody down to Elkins, West Virginia, where we were supporting a home missionary, Reverend Hugh Rogers. But we hadn't heard, the church had not heard from him in quite a while, and they did not know how he was doing, if he was having problems or whatever. So the church voted to send a couple of men down to visit and see what the situation was. So I drove the Peugeot down, and all went well until we got into West Virginia. We and it was quite a big mountain, and the road went up the side of the mountain, practically a straight line for probably at least a mile, and the car being a little underpowered for such a climb, what I did was I had my gas pedal practically to the floor all the way up that leg of the mountain. So I was not watching the speedometer. I was watching the road. And I didn't know how fast I was going, but anyway, at the top of this leg of the mountain there was a sharp left turn because the mountain turned. And I didn't realize how sharp it was or how fast I was going. And right at the sharpest point in the curve, it dropped off from the pavement, 3 or 4 inches. And I went off into that spot, and it threw us into a spin. And so instead of following the highway, I went right across the highway in this spin. And of course, on the other side was a very, very deep, it was like a cliff. It dropped off several hundred feet. And I was headed straight. Of course, there was this guardrail there. But at the speed I was going, I probably would have gone right through the guardrail. We would have dropped several hundred feet and both been killed. So that's why I said it was a certain death. But the Lord intervened, and because there was a loaded coal truck coming down the road. He had about 20 tons of coal on, and he stopped just at the right spot. So instead of going across the highway and into the guardrail, etc., the spin took me right directly into his rear wheels. He had dual rear wheels, And so that put us into a reverse spin. We went back and ended up in the middle of the highway.
Wow.
So if that coal truck hadn't been there at the right spot at the right time, we would have been goners. We were able to talk to the coal truck driver after we got out of our car, which was totaled. And of course, my friend was an insurance agent. So he talked to the coal truck driver afterward and told him, well, have your truck checked out to make sure that there's no damage done, which he did, and they found no damage. I don't think we moved that coal truck more than an inch
Wow.
when we hit it. So that was pretty certain. Without the Lord's talking to this coal truck driver to stop right there.
Right. You had said before that the coal truck driver saw you coming and he was experienced with the road.
Yes, that's right. He saw us coming up. He knew I was going too fast for that curve. So he come to a dead stop. And so he was right in the right spot to keep us from going over the bank. So the Lord was with us. Of course, we couldn't drive the car the rest of the way down because Elkins was down in the middle of the state. So we got back into Cumberland, which was the last city we had come through, Cumberland, Maryland. And we had to call the Rogers and tell them what had happened. And they had two sons, and they drove down, picked us up. We had to leave the car there. I don't know what they did with the car. But anyway, they took us to their home, and we stayed there for the weekend and had a nice time with them and everything. And then when it was time to come home, they drove us all the way up to Towanda. So the Lord was with us. Let's see, that was number 3. Okay, number 4 was in 1964. At that time, we were living in Rhode Island because I had got my first job as out of college was in Providence, Rhode Island at the U.S. Rubber Company,
What year?
1964.
No,
What year
what-
did you graduate college?
Well, I graduated from Bucknell with a bachelor's degree in 1947.
And this was your first job after that?
Well, I went to Cornell for a year of graduate work.
So it would have been like 1948?
Well, when I got the job,
Okay.
yeah, it was 1948,
Okay.
and this was after we got married. We were in we were found an apartment, second floor apartment, in a suburb of Providence, big town called Conimicut. Remember that? Anyway, they had some special doings back at Bucknell, and which I went down to participate in alone. I was alone. I left my dear wife in Rhode Island, and I drove down to Lewisburg, Pennsylvania, and coming back in eastern Pennsylvania, I come across a very long hill, and there was a slow, what am I going to say? Traffic was very slow, and there was a long line of vehicles crawling up this long hill. And of course I had my 1937 Chevrolet, which was 6 cylinders, so it was a little bit more powerful than some of the cars I had. And I had a lot of momentum going, so I decided, well, there's nothing coming the other way, I'll just pass this long line of cars. That was my first mistake. Well, I got about halfway up the line, and a vehicle showed up coming down right in the lane I was in. And I tried to move over, and get in, but nobody would open up to let me into the line. But the Lord provided a spot for me to get off on the wrong side of the highway. So I was able to pull across there and stop and wait till the end of the line came again. But if there was no place for me to turn off, could have had a front end crash, which could be rather deadly.
Yeah.
Okay. That must have been number 3. Number 4 was in 1949. There was a national recession in 1949, and they were laying off people right and left. And my dear wife also had a job at the U.S. Rubber Company, of all things, inspecting golf balls. But anyway, we both got laid off, so we headed back to the farm, to her parents' farm. And I finally was able to get another job, actually by contacting Cornell again, and this was a job in East Syracuse at the silver plating factory. Now to get a nice shiny silver plate, and this would apply to gold too, you had to use potassium silver cyanide solution, because you needed the cyanide to complex the silver ions. Otherwise, you'd have a very rough surface when you got through plating. Of course, we plated flat wire and hollow wire with silver. Well, this was done in a rubber-lined steel tank, which held probably somewhere between 200 and 300 gallons of cyanide solution. And they had put me in charge of the silver plating department, but every Saturday we had to clean up the solution, because there would be various grit and stuff that would accumulate during the week. And so we had a powerful electric motor pump and a filter press to pump the solution through from the dirty tank to a clean tank. And this, it was doing this through rubber hoses, probably almost 2 inches in diameter. And it was very forceful. But I was standing there near the one tank, and all of a sudden, the rubber hose came loose, and it shot straight up in the air. And so I got a shower of cyanide solution all over me. Fortunately, I kept my mouth shut. and my eyes shut. And they took me off and gave me a nice shower. But if I had ingested a very little bit of that cyanide solution, you know, that's kind of a dangerous stuff.
Yeah.
But the Lord protected me. Okay, that's the 4 certain death situations. Now, then the next category is possible death from a dangerous situation. Well, the first one on my list was in 1965. My sister Elaine had completed her midwifery training in Kentucky and was ready to come home. So I went down. See, was it two of our kids went with me? Were you
Ellen
with
and
me?
Rich and
And you?
Yes.
Well, the driving through eastern Kentucky was not the greatest. There was slow traffic, a lot of curves, no way to pass. But finally, after a few miles, it opened up. So, and I had a V8 Studebaker, and so I gunned it past at least the one vehicle, and got back in just in time, back into line. But somewhere in there was a state trooper, and he saw what I was doing. So he flagged me down and said, "What you did was bad." Just to pass one vehicle that was slow. And so that was a dangerous situation. But the Lord helped us get through it. And let's see, I think that was one time when he was going to find me, but he said, "Well, we won't take you to the officer, justice of the peace, or whatever it was that would collect the fine." He said, "I'll give him the information and he can mail it to you, and then you can mail it back the fine." So I don't know whether I ever did or not, but probably. Anyway, we got home without further problems, right?
Yeah, you did mail it, and then you mailed flowery comments about how beautiful the state was and all this and that. And you mailed it in.
Okay, I didn't remember that. All right. Okay, then number 2 dangerous situation was when we went swimming in the Schrader Creek, which I may have mentioned somewhere before.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a very nice place to go swimming. And we didn't see any rattlesnakes or any other snakes for that matter. And didn't hear anything. But we were making enough commotion, I guess, it kind of scared the rattlesnakes away. So we got home without anything bad happening to us. Okay, and then number 3 was in 1962. We were in Florida visiting Elaine at her place, and my mother was there, and you must have been there too, right?
I would hope so.
Anyway, my brother Bill was always a speed demon, and with cars and with airplanes. He owned a 4-place Mooney airplane, which had a cruising speed of 190 miles per hour. And of course, he had the proper license and everything. But then he had a heart attack, and they took away his license. But he could still fly gliders, so he got into glider flying. Well, Bill was there with us in Florida, and he had a hankering to go glider flying. So he called around to different airports in Florida to see where he could rent a glider and a tow plane. And they finally found this small airport up north of Orlando. So I drove him up there, and I went up with him. It was really nice up there, quiet and just a little wind whistle. And but there weren't any mountains there to get really good lift, you know. So the tow plane left us off under a big black cloud, and under the cloud there was lift. And so as long as we stayed under that cloud, we were fine. But then after a while, Bill realized that we were getting further and further away from that airport. We're headed north under that cloud. So he said, well, I'm going to have to hunt around and see if I can find some lift somewhere, which he did, but he never found any other place where there was lift. And we kept going lower and lower and lower. He finally said, well, we're so close to the ground, we're going to have to find a place to set down. So he found a field, turned out to be a cow pasture, and he set the glider down in that field, and he said, well, I'm going to have to hitchhike back to the airport. So I stayed with the glider while he went. The people at the airport weren't too happy with him. I don't know how much the initial rental was, but because of this mishap, and they had to bring in another tow plane and land it, and then take off and take it back to the airport. So they charged us an extra $75 for this little incident. But anyhow, it could have been a lot worse if they couldn't have found a decent place. By the way, I didn't see any cows in the cow pasture. Okay, so that was one dangerous situation. Okay.
You need to shut it down.
I'm having a hard time reading my scribbling. Okay, the next one is 1967. We were several years in the summer. We would go up to Baxter State Park in northern Maine, and that's where Mount Katahdin was. Mount Katahdin is the northern terminus of the Appalachian Trail, but it's up, well, it was the highest mountain in Maine. It was not as high as Mount Washington, which is in New Hampshire, but it was over 5,000 foot altitude. But we would hike up from the campgrounds at the foot of the mountain, hike up to the top of the mountain, sign the record